Beneath the merciless skies of southern Peru, where the desert stretches like an ocean of stone and silence, lies a mystery so vast it can only be seen from above. A mystery carved not in temples or monuments, but into the very skin of the earth. Across the parched pampa, straight lines run for miles, etched with impossible precision. Spirals unfurl, trapezoids stretch toward the horizon, and giant figures, a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, emerge from the dust like visions of another world. They are so immense that to walk among them is to see nothing at all. Only the gods in the heavens, or the pilots of modern planes, can behold their full design. Who drew these lines? For what purpose? Were they prayers for water in a land without rain, or messages to deities high above the clouds? This is not a puzzle made for idle curiosity. It is a riddle of survival, belief, and human willpower against one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. And to understand it, we must return not to the skies, but to the desert floor, where an ancient people once listened to the whispers of wind and sand. The Nazca Desert, a vast plateau hemmed in by the Andes to the east and the Pacific to the west, appears at first glance lifeless. The sun scalds the land without mercy, rain falls so rarely it is remembered in legends, not in calendars. Yet, it is precisely this brutal environment that has preserved the great geoglyphs for more than 1,000 years. The stones, darkened by centuries of oxidation, were brushed aside by ancient hands, exposing the pale earth beneath. Once exposed, the lines did not vanish. They endured, protected by the stillness of air, the absence of storms, the constancy of silence. For those who lived here 2,000 years ago, this desert was not an empty void. It was alive, its dryness a challenge, its barrenness a test of devotion. To the Nazca, survival demanded more than tools and farming. It demanded faith, ritual, and a dialogue with powers unseen. The earth was not simply a foundation beneath their feet, it was a canvas upon which they poured their fears, their prayers, and their hope. In this unforgiving cradle, where scarcity forged ingenuity, the story of the Nazca Lines begins, not as art, not as spectacle, but as an act of faith inscribed upon eternity. And from here, the footsteps of the Nazca people emerge, carrying us deeper into their hidden world. The story of the lines cannot be told without first stepping into the lives of the people who carved them. Long before the hummingbird spread its wings across the desert, the Nazca culture emerged from the remnants of an older civilization, the Paracas. From around 200 BCE, the valleys carved by rivers flowing down from the Andes became their lifelines. Here, in a world where the desert pressed hard against strips of green, the Nazca people built communities that pulsed with fragile vitality. Their villages stood close to water, for water was destiny. Adobe walls rose from the earth, humble yet enduring. Families tended crops of maize, beans, and cotton, nourished by irrigation canals painstakingly dug into stubborn ground. Every stalk of corn was a triumph, every drop of water a treasure more precious than gold. Survival was never guaranteed, it was a daily negotiation with the land. But the Nazca were not merely farmers. They were artisans, their world awash with color and pattern. Pottery bore fantastical shapes, whales, birds, warriors, rendered in hues that defied the desert's monotone. Textiles shimmered with vibrant reds, yellows, and blues, threads spun into images of the divine. Their art was not decoration, it was belief woven and painted into matter, a bridge between themselves and forces greater than they could see. And like all ancient peoples, they sought meaning beyond survival. To them, mountains, rivers, and skies were not inert landscapes but living spirits. The earth was Pachamama, Mother Earth, who demanded reverence. The stars wheeled above not as distant fires but as guides, their patterns echoing the rhythms of planting and harvest. Every season, every ritual was a conversation with the unseen. It was in this world, where faith and survival intertwined, that the first steps toward the geoglyphs were taken. The Nazca were learning not only to till the soil but to inscribe their devotion upon it. The desert floor, barren and eternal, beckoned as a canvas far larger than any pot or textile. Soon, their footprints would stretch into lines that defied comprehension, and their prayers would be written across the land itself. From the modest beginnings of villages and fields, the Nazca were preparing to leave marks that would outlive their names, etchings vast enough for the gods themselves to behold. The Nazca Desert, vast and silent, became the stage for one of humanity's most audacious creations. Sometime around the 1st century CE, men and women began to walk deliberately across the barren pampa, their footsteps guided not by chance but by vision. With simple tools, they cleared away the sunburnt stones, revealing the pale earth beneath. A single path became a line stretched across the desert. Many lines converged into forms too immense for the human eye to grasp. There was no metal, no machinery, no vantage point from which to view the whole. And yet, the Nazca drew with flawless precision. Straight lines ran arrow-true for miles, cutting across valleys and hills as though guided by an unseen hand. Spirals curled outward like galaxies. Trapezoids unfurled in the sand, their broad ends pointing toward distant horizons. To walk these lines was to walk blind, tracing a design one could never behold in its entirety. The act itself was ritual. Families, priests, or perhaps entire communities moved in unison, their labor both sacred and communal. Each stroke across the desert was not random but intentional, a gesture of faith etched on a scale so vast it could only be meant for powers dwelling above. In time, hundreds of these markings accumulated, a silent scripture sprawling across nearly 500 square kilometers. Some figures lay simple, a line, a rectangle, a cross of paths. Others took on bold shapes, birds with wings outstretched, creatures of the sea, beasts of the land, woven into the earth with elegance and permanence. Here, in a desert where rain might not fall for centuries, the geoglyphs endured. Each symbol waited beneath the sun, untouched, unwashed, guarded by the very stillness of the climate. They were not transient offerings of incense or food, gone within hours or days. They were eternal offerings, carved into the bones of the land itself. The Nazca had begun to converse with the heavens, their language written in lines so immense that only the gods, or future civilizations who conquered the skies, could read them. And yet, these figures were only the beginning. Soon, the desert would transform into a tapestry of living symbols, their meanings hidden but their presence undeniable. From simple lines, the canvas would evolve into shapes that no human standing on the ground could fully understand. As the years unfolded, the Nazca's designs grew ever more ambitious. What began as straight lines and sweeping trapezoids soon transformed into creatures that seemed to emerge from myth itself. On the desert floor, figures of astonishing scale stretched into existence, a hummingbird with wings spread wider than a football field, a spider with impossibly long legs, a monkey curling its tail into a spiral that mirrored the galaxies above. To walk beside these geoglyphs was to see nothing but scattered paths of pale soil. A traveler on foot would never recognize the form. But from the heavens, or from the mountaintops that fringed the pampa, the shapes revealed themselves with clarity and power. It was as if they were meant not for human eyes at all, but for the gaze of God soaring overhead. Each design carried weight, its imagery chosen with purpose. Birds may have symbolized freedom and flight, bridging the earth to the sky. Whales and fish spoke of the Pacific coast, of abundance and sustenance from waters miles away. The monkey, the jaguar, the condor, creatures of forest and mountain, brought together all realms of existence, uniting desert, sea, and highlands in a single sacred vision. What is most striking is the precision. The hummingbird's beak runs straight and unbroken, the condor's wings stretch symmetrically across the earth. Without vantage points, without modern instruments, how could such accuracy be achieved? Were ropes and stakes laid out in careful grids? Did shamans climb the nearby hills to guide the work below? However they did it, the result defies comprehension, giant images traced across a barren land, invisible from the ground, eternal from the sky. And so the desert became a gallery that no living eye could fully appreciate. To the Nazca, that may have been the point. Their audience was never meant to be other humans. Their designs were offerings to the heavens, vast messages inscribed in a language only gods could read. From now on, the Pampa itself would not merely be a desert, it would be a sacred text, where devotion was written not in words, but in living images that span the horizon. Beneath the blazing Peruvian sky, the desert was not merely an open canvas but a stage for ritual. Here, on the endless Pampa, the Nazca gathered not only to etch their lines but to breathe life into them with ceremony. The geoglyphs were not silent marks, they were focal points, sites of performance where faith and survival intertwined. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of offerings, fragments of broken pottery, scattered seashells carried from distant shores, and wooden posts that once marked sacred spaces. These were not remnants of casual gatherings. They were the debris of devotion, the aftertaste of ritual. At times, the desert must have thundered with sound, the beat of drums, the chant of voices rising against the wind, the stamping of feet as processions walked along the lines themselves. The desert sun was merciless, yet that was part of the devotion. To endure its heat, to march across shimmering sand in deliberate patterns, was to sacrifice comfort, to prove loyalty to forces unseen. Some researchers believe the geoglyphs doubled as ceremonial walkways, paths traced by pilgrims who reenacted myths or prayed for rain. To walk the hummingbird's wing, to follow the spiral of the monkey's tail, was to enter into communion with the cosmos. The presence of water rituals looms large. The Nazca lived in a land where rivers were fickle, where a single failed harvest could spell doom. Ceremonies may have invoked the mountain gods, the bringers of rain, the guardians of aquifers hidden beneath the earth. Every offering, every broken vessel, was a plea for life in a world that teetered on the edge of drought. And so, beneath the scorching sun, faith became spectacle. The lines were not passive designs but living arteries of ritual, walked and celebrated, charged with meaning. The desert floor was transformed into a theater of belief, where every gesture was amplified by the immensity of the land. In these ceremonies, the Nazca fused survival with the sacred, leaving behind not only marks upon the earth but echoes of devotion still felt in the silence of the Pampa today. In the Nazca world, every breath of wind and every drop of rain was bound to the will of unseen powers. The desert was not cruel by accident, it was a stage upon which the gods tested humanity. And the Nazca, surrounded by silence and drought, turned their gaze upward in desperation and reverence. The gods of the mountains, towering in the east, held the keys to life. From their snowy peaks flowed the rivers that carved narrow green valleys into the desert. When the water failed, famine followed. The geoglyphs may have been prayers etched at a scale so immense that the deities could not ignore them. The hummingbird, a messenger between worlds, traced its flight upon the earth. The spider, linked to rain and Indian belief, stretched its long legs across the desert floor as a promise of fertility. But faith alone was not enough. The Nazca engineered puquios, ingenious underground aqueducts spiraling into the earth like giant funnels, channeling hidden groundwater to sustain crops. These spirals echoed the very shapes they carved into the desert, blending technology with ritual, necessity with devotion. For the Nazca, there was no separation between science and religion. Every act of engineering was also an act of worship. The struggle for survival was constant, and every harvest a fragile victory. When the rains came, ceremonies filled the desert with offerings and chants. When the skies withheld their mercy, processions traced the lines, calling the gods to listen. The very act of inscribing the desert may have been both a plea and a bargain, devotion in exchange for life. In this unrelenting land, the Nazca balanced between despair and hope. Their gods were not distant abstractions but ever-present forces, capable of granting abundance or condemning entire generations to hunger. And so they carved, they walked, they prayed, etching survival into the earth itself, transforming barren silence into an eternal dialogue with the divine. The desert remembers what its people cannot. By the 7th century, the vibrant Nazca culture began to fade, its rituals silenced, its once thriving valleys slipping into decline. Climate change may have struck first, floods unleashed by El Niño, followed by crushing droughts that withered crops and fractured the fragile balance of life. The lines, once walked in processions, stood alone under a burning sky. But the desert was never empty for long. New peoples rose in the Andes, bringing with them power and conquest. The Wari Empire, spreading from the highlands, swept into the valleys that had once belonged to the Nazca. Their influence reshaped the land, new cities, new fortifications, and new ways of life. Yet amid this transformation, the lines remained. The conquerors did not erase them, nor did they add to them. They stood as relics of a vanished faith, their purpose already forgotten by those who now lived among them. Generations passed. The Nazca themselves faded into the stream of Indian history, absorbed, conquered, transformed. Still the lines endured, untouched by rain, wind, or the hand of time. To the wary, to the Inca centuries later, they may have been curiosities, faint scars upon the land. No chronicles speak of them, no myths retell their origin. Silence grew around the geoglyphs, a silence that lasted 1,000 years. It was as though the desert had swallowed the memory of the people who made them, preserving only their marks upon the earth. The lines became ghosts, mute witnesses to civilizations that rose and fell around them. Forgotten, yet not destroyed, they waited beneath the relentless sun for another set of eyes to uncover their meaning. And when that day came, it would not be the gods of the mountains who looked upon them, but humans who had learned to conquer the skies. For centuries the Nazca Lines lay in silence, their meaning hidden, their scale invisible to those who walked the desert floor. Local farmers and travelers may have seen faint pathways, curious shapes etched into the earth, but the vast figures remained a secret held by the horizon itself. Then, in the 20th century, humanity finally rose high enough to see what the gods had always known. It was the 1920s when commercial aviation began tracing routes across southern Peru. Pilots flying over the Pampa looked down and were astonished. From their cockpits, the desert was no longer empty, it was alive with sprawling images, a spider stretching across the sand, a condor with wings wider than a city street, lines running straight to the edge of vision. What had lain forgotten for a millennium now unfolded in its full immensity beneath the eyes of modern explorers. Soon archaeologists arrived, their boots crunching over stones the Nazca had cleared centuries before. Paul Kosak, an American historian in the 1940s, was among the first to study them seriously. From the air he saw lines converging like rays of sunlight, a giant calendar drawn upon the earth. To him, the desert was not chaos but order, a map of cosmic alignment etched in stone and silence. His work caught the imagination of Maria Reich, a German mathematician who would devote her entire life to the lines. Armed with little more than surveying equipment, a bicycle, and boundless dedication, she measured, mapped, and guarded the geoglyphs for decades. Known as the Lady of the Lines, she became their protector, battling erosion, vandalism, and disbelief. Through her, the world came to recognize that what the Nazca had left was not accident or idle pastime, but deliberate, monumental creation. The rediscovery from the sky changed everything. What had been forgotten by generations now captured global attention, igniting debates, wonder, and fascination. The desert's mute whispers had found new listeners, not gods this time, but a world eager to solve the riddle of lines no human eye was ever meant to see from the ground. Once the Nazca Lines were rediscovered, fascination quickly gave way to debate. What could compel an ancient people to carve images so immense, visible only from the sky? The desert became not just an archaeological site, but a battlefield of ideas. Paul Kosak had seen the geoglyphs as a calendar in the sand, lines aligning with the solstices, mapping the heavens in earthbound form. Maria Reich carried this theory forward, believing the figures and paths were instruments of astronomy, guiding agricultural cycles through celestial observation. To her, every line was a calculation, every trapezoid a message to the sun and stars. But others challenged this view. Scholars argued the sheer number of lines, thousands of them, scattered without uniformity, was far too chaotic to serve as a precise calendar. Instead, some proposed they were ceremonial walkways, paths meant for processions, linking the desert floor to the divine. Still others looked beyond the earth itself. Erich von Daniken, in the 1960s, famously claimed the lines were landing strips for ancient visitors from the stars. His theory captured public imagination, blending mystery with science fiction, though archaeologists dismissed it as fantasy. Yet it left its mark, weaving extraterrestrials into the Nazca's enigma and ensuring the lines became cultural icons as much as historical puzzles. Modern studies have leaned toward rituals of water and fertility. The hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, all creatures tied to life and abundance, may have formed a vast landscape of prayers for rain. Some lines point to mountain springs, aquifers, or rivers, reinforcing the belief that these were not cosmic maps but earthly pleas, written in a language of sand and silence. And yet, certainty remains elusive. For every theory, evidence collides with doubt. The Nazca themselves left no written words, no codex to explain their work. What survives is mystery, vast as the desert itself. Each line whispers possibilities but offers no answers, forcing scholars, explorers, and dreamers alike to argue across centuries. Thus, the geoglyphs live not only as monuments of stone but as sparks of imagination, their meaning suspended between science, faith, and myth. They divide scholars, but unite humanity in wonder, drawing all who see them into the same unanswered question carved into the earth. The Nazca Desert still lies in silence, its vast plateau guarded by the sun, the wind, and the patience of millennia. From the air, the lines stretch onward, unbroken, etched into the earth with a permanence that defies the fragility of human life. They remain as they have for centuries, mute, majestic, and incomprehensible. Today, satellites map them in exquisite detail, drones fly low across their ancient paths, and archaeologists use laser technology to uncover new figures hidden beneath the dust. Yet for all our tools, the mystery remains intact. The geoglyphs are not solved equations, they are echoes of a people who lived and struggled in a land of extremes. To seek their meaning is to seek the soul of the Nazca themselves. Pilots still circle above, their planes tracing arcs across the desert sky. Tourists peer through glass, eyes wide as birds and monkeys, and spirals unfold beneath them. For a moment, they glimpse what only gods were meant to see, a landscape transformed into scripture, a prayer stretched across miles of barren ground. And in that moment, time collapses. The chants of long-dead priests, the rhythm of footsteps across ritual paths, the whispered pleas for rain, all seem to stir again in the desert wind. The Nazca are gone, absorbed into history, but their voices remain etched upon the earth, too vast to fade, too silent to explain. The desert still whispers. Its language is lines, its message eternal. And as long as the geoglyphs endure, humanity will return to them, seeking, questioning, marveling, drawn into the dialogue that Nazca began 2,000 years ago, a dialogue that continues, unanswered, beneath the burning Peruvian sun.